I'm Gloria Feldt. I'm co-founder and president of Take the Lead, and we have the mission of gender parity in leadership by actually next year. So we've got a lot of work to do. And I am a proud member of the New York Women's Forum and the Arizona Women's Forum. So I have the blessing of being able to be known and involved with two different forums, and it's such a wonderful organization. And it is my huge pleasure and honor now to be able to interview for this Women in Business Wednesday one of my heroes, Nadine Hack. Nadine is the social justice hero of everyone's life. And Nadine, I'm so excited to be here with you.
Me
I'm
too,
so
Gloria.
excited to be here with you. We have, we've been doing so many
Forever.
things in parallel, together, everything. But I want to start by reading something that I saw on social media yesterday.
Okay.
Okay? All right. Under the word hope in any great dictionary, see this woman's beatific smile. Nadine Hack is the most beloved wandering dreamer I know. She worked with Shirley, Chisholm, and 100 other visionaries. She runs a global peace and support initiative. She makes the world better daily with her enthusiastic, here's what we need to do. I think that's why we get along so well. 'Cause we're in that mindset together. I love you, Nadine. Hope is not a wish. It is a choice of action. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. That is from Alison Palmer, of our favorite musicians, Betty.
Yes.
Yes. So, I mean, nothing could sum up better your life's work, I think. But we want to hear from you.
Okay.
We want to hear from you about how did you get there? And a question I always like to ask people first is, how did you get to be you? How did this happen?
So I grew up in the early 1950s in Brooklyn. I was profoundly affected by the first civil rights movement, followed by the women's rights movement, followed by a lot of other social justice activism during that time. Martin Luther King Jr.'s 1963 March on Washington, I Have a Dream speech was really a pivotal moment for me. It just synced with my inner sense of justice, and it's something that I even had younger. I grew up Jewish, and I went to Hebrew school. And when I was about somewhere between 5 and 7 years old, my Hebrew school teacher was teaching us about the Jewish high holidays. And the short version is on Rosh Hashanah, God judges everybody and writes in the book of life what's going to happen. It's a kind of karmic principle based on what you did last year, what's going to happen in your coming year. And then you have 10 days of like prayer and repentance and fasting. And on the 10th day, Yom Kippur, God seals the book. That's it. So I raise my hand and I say to my Hebrew school teacher, but wait a second, what about the Gentiles? Because at that point in my life, all I know is Jew and Gentile. You know, I have yet to learn about Christianity, Buddhism, Confucianism, and all the other world religions that I've studied and respect and admire. And my Hebrew school teacher says to me, oh, don't worry about that, Natana, which is my Hebrew name. Mm-hmm. We're the chosen people. I was so profoundly disturbed by her answer to my question, does God judge everybody, that for those 10 days, my little child prayer was, God, I'm praying for all the Gentiles in the world because they don't know. It's not their fault. They just don't know what they're supposed to be doing.
And isn't it funny that they think the same about us?
And I married an Irish Catholic man, and our wedding rites were performed by Desmond Tutu, an Anglican, and he performed them in Kosa. So, you know, we're very universalist, but yes. Those fears of the other. Mm-hmm. And I think if I sum up my life, it's about doing everything to stop othering, mm-hmm. and to be as myself, as inclusive, as embracing, as possible and to amplify the voices of other people who are about inclusion, diversity, fighting xenophobia, in all its many horrific forms.
Well, there's a lot of work to be done. There's a tremendous amount of work to be done. I think we will have plenty of work for the rest of our lives. We have to keep going for a long time. I am curious, though, as to what in your family background also influenced you, because if you think about it, our own histories always impact and shape us. I'd love to know more about what shaped you from your family background. And by the way, I have to tell you that my husband believed everything good in the world came from Brooklyn. So you're like, you're way on up there. I'm just a little Texas girl here. So yeah. but if you'd share what brought you here, what.
So I had a bubby, which is Yiddish for grandma, who taught me, again, when I was very young, like that age, that when I would go to the bakery, that's back in the days, I don't think I bought a packaged bread until I was in my 20s, Back in the day, you went to a bakery, you went to a butcher, and she taught me to ask the baker what the cost of yesterday's bread was and the cost of today's bread was. Now, mind you, we lived very modestly in an apartment building in Brooklyn that not only with my bubby, but it was like the entire shtetl from Basilia relocated into my apartment. So I had my Aunt Molly, my Aunt Razel, the extended, I had a Säid, Aunt Molly's.
This could be a Broadway play,
obviously. And she taught me whatever pennies I saved by buying yesterday's bread instead of today's bread, we had a pickle jar on top of what she always called the ice box. She never learned the word refrigerator. On top of the ice box, which was a tzedakah jar. Now, tzedakah, literal translation is charity, but actually its deeper translation is what it is to be human, like you give. So I learned at a very young age that philanthropy and giving is not something you do when you achieve a certain level of wealth. It's something you just do as a human being because there are always people who are less fortunate than you are.
Right, exactly, yeah. So as you started on your career, what were the first things that you did that brought you into social justice movements?
Okay, so in 1964, I had two extraordinary mentors because I volunteered for Shirley Chisholm's first New York State Assembly race, running from Brooklyn. And at the same time, I volunteered with Bella Abzug at Women's Strike for Peace. So, doesn't get better than Shirley and Bella. And what the two of them taught me is that racism, sexism, classism, militarism, environmental degradation, and all the other constellation of social justice issues are inextricably interconnected, and we have to work on them together. What today we call intersectional organizing. They were prescient, and they understood that long before the term intersectional organizing made it into the common lexicon.
I love that, because so often they get siloed. And what happens with that then is that the different groups that are working on those issues don't necessarily work together. Whereas if we mass our strengths, we're much more likely to succeed.
That's so true. I mean, you can go back to the suffragists and the abolitionists, and when they worked together, they were powerful. And when there was a rupture, when the suffragists asked Ida B. Wells, the great, brilliant Black journalist who wrote about lynchings at risk of her own life, was asked to march at the back of the parade. There was a big rupture. And the same thing happened, by the way, in the American Civil Rights Movement and the American Women's Rights Movement. Black women were told by their brothers, focus on supporting Black rights and your black brothers don't get involved in the women's rights movement.
Right.
And women's rights, like, largely the face of the movement was white middle class women, which is not an honest reflection. Because in fact, 50% of the people who were involved in the women's rights movement during that time were women of color. Mm-hmm. And Gloria Steinem used to travel the country with Dorothy Pittman, a white woman and a black woman, and with other great leaders of both colors and all colors, the full spectrum, and make that point over and over and show the crowds and the pictures. But unfortunately, history is made by those who have more power, and we still, unfortunately, have not achieved the equality we would have liked to by now, and we certainly hadn't by then. And so most of even the historical photographs and video footage focus in on the white women. And they were told, stick with us, don't worry about the civil rights movement. And it was these kind of brilliant people who understood the connection and the importance of being in coalition. We have strength in numbers always.
Well, if you think about it also, the narrative gets written by the prevailing cultural
dominant.
Whoever is dominant. It's ultimately about the power structure.
Yeah.
And it is a power structure that doesn't want to change.
Yes.
So the narrative then gets written in a way that it will continue the prevailing ruptures.
Right.
And not lead us toward more of the intersectionality that you
Yeah.
are talking about.
Yeah.
So wonderful that you surface that as an issue, and I'm sure you must talk about it a lot.
Constantly. I mean, it's something that I talk about with everybody, everywhere. And I also say to people something that might sound contradictory, because people frequently ask me the question, well, what can I do? Like, anything I do is like a stone in a pebble in the ocean. And I say to them, this is not true. Do whatever you can, wherever you can, however you can. And you can choose your issue and work on that. And you can work on it in your neighborhood. You can work on it in your state. You can work on it nationally. You can work on it internationally. It's all those little bits of good that we're doing. And that's actually a quote from Desmond Tutu. It's those little bits of good put together that change the world. And so I say that, but then I also say, as much as you can, work with others. Like, find other people who are doing the same thing. Don't try to create a new not-for-profit. Like, there might be one out there that's already doing your work, or if you are creating a new not-for-profit, find out who else is in the landscape and try to cooperate with them rather than compete with them, because that's another big issue, is competition amongst groups who are seeking funding to do their good work. And
well, so talk about your career path then. How did when did you?
Oh my God, I have the most nonlinear life of anybody.
Good. Good. That would be very interesting. I want to know about it.
Okay, so I already was active. I dropped out of high school to become a full-time political organizer. I was in a political street theater troupe, traveling the country, doing benefit performances for the Chicago 7, for the Black Panthers. I mean, I come from a pretty far left source. And I have many arrests. I have my mugshot from my 1968 arrest, and I don't even know how I got that, but I have it, and I've posted it on social media because I'm very proud of it. I just stayed active, and it's very interesting because when I hit 60, which is already my distant past.
Not so distant.
Not so distant, but
Yeah. Right.
More than a decade ago, a lot of people would say to me, You know, in the 60s, I used to be really active, and then I became, fill in the blank, a hedge fund manager, a private equity investor. And now I'd like to do something meaningful again. And whenever I would hear that, I'd think, I'm really glad I stuck with meaningful straight through.
And how did you do that specifically?
Okay, so after the political street theater troupe, that group of us moved out to the West Coast, to Oregon, and we formed a commune, and I lived on a commune thinking that, you know, this was going to be like everything shared, everything wonderful, but sexism still existed on the commune. So then I moved from the commune to a feminist collective in New Mexico. And then after a while, I said, you know, this is great. Like, I'm doing things within my community, but I need to be doing something broader. So I moved up to Oakland, California, and I became a community organizer. And I worked in East Oakland, California, doing community development work. And
from there,
then from there, and then I moved back to New York around a decade later, late 70s, early 80s, and I just stayed active in, and the whole time I was out west, both in Oregon and New Mexico, and then California, nobody knew that my family had wealth. Like, I lived, you know, on a mattress on the floor, very, 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 and I never talked about my family because I wanted to, like, prove myself as an individual, not, you know, the daughter of whatever. And I was so effective at it. I met everybody from the governor. You know, I worked with then youngest Governor Jerry Brown, who I've stayed in touch with through when he became oldest Governor Jerry Brown, and we're still in touch with each other. And I did a whole renewable resource initiative with him and the Secretary of State of Resources in California, again, before the term renewable resources was in the common lexicon. And when I came back to New York, I thought, okay, now I've been doing this work, but I also do have access to wealth. So let me combine my activism and my wealth. And I started to do a lot of fundraising. And I fundraised for, specifically for women and minority candidates, because I figured that white male candidates had the old boys network, and they didn't need me. So
right on that.
Yeah. And I must have hosted, I don't know how many hundreds, if not thousands, of fundraisers, and but always like to say, like, whenever articles were written about me, and someone would send me like the draft before it went to print, and between the two commas it said something like socialite fundraiser. I said, if you don't change that to citizen activist, like, just don't even run the article. Like, I'm not a socialite fundraiser. I'm a citizen activist who happens to have access to funds.
So was that the biggest challenge? What were the biggest challenges that you faced?
Okay, so then from there, I also started to do consulting work work for not-for-profits, consulting work for businesses that wanted to, like, do corporate social responsibility, consulting work for the United Nations, for all kinds of intergovernmental affairs, and I started my own consulting business. And as I say, I not only was a fundraiser, but I was like a senior level. So let's take one example. In 1988, I was the national co-chair, and I was the New York State chair of the euphemistically named Democratic Presidential Victory Fund. Now, we raised more money. We raised $57 million in that campaign, which back then,
that was real money.
That was real money.
That was real money.
Now that's breakfast on Wednesday, but then it was like real money. But yet, even though I was the head, every time and I was convening groups, all kinds of groups. I was running $25 a ticket fundraiser for young people. I was raising $100,000 ticket for like people of worth, because that particular campaign had a cap. They weren't allowing unlimited, which I was very happy for. And that's the year that the New York Times coined the term sewer money. And it really is sewer money. It's disgusting people who are trying to get their tax loop passed, who are giving mega millions. And unfortunately, Citizens United like overturned all of that progress. But going back to there, every time I walked into a new room, I was treated like the woman who was there to pour the coffee. And I had to reestablish, no, I'm the one in charge. And at first, I did it kind of like with like, you know, kind of an attitude. And I could see that didn't go over well. So I learned from a friend of mine to disarm with humor.
Yes.
And so when a man asked me, when I came in and he said, oh, I'd like a coffee, I just looked at him and said, oh, you do? I'd like one too. I take mine with cream and sugar. And at first his face was shocked, but he got up, he went and he got the coffee. And when he came back, he took my arms. He said, Nadine, I have 3 daughters. I never want them treated the way I just treated you. And if you hadn't said what you said, I wouldn't have known, because it's not in my consciousness. I wasn't even aware of what I was doing, so thank you.
That is a great story that needs to be told far and wide. There are a couple of reasons. Number one, daughters.
Yes.
I find that men with daughters, when you can point out these injustices, they're on board immediately, because no matter what their position is on the political spectrum, they want their daughters to have every opportunity, right?
Absolutely.
Yes, right. But the other is that you can make change without having a fight about it.
Yes.
You can make change. And so I want you to drill down into that. I looked at your TED Talk. And I was struck by how you explained how you would get disparate groups who seemingly had nothing in common.
They actually hated each other.
They hated each other, were on very opposite sides of the coin.
Right.
And how you would find the thing that would unite them.
Yeah.
So I think people need to hear that. I'd love for you to describe that process.
So the TEDx, which is called Adversaries to Allies, describes a story of a project I did when I was back in California. And I was working with a group called OCUR, which was the Community Development Organization. And a woman from the California Department of Forestry came to talk to us about tree planting, urban tree planting. And everybody around the room, all the organizers, were like rolling their eyes. They were like, you know, we're dealing with like feeding hungry children, making sure people are housed, you know, like trees, But then she said the magic word. She said, my PhD is citizen activism in urban renewal. And I have learned from experience that if we do this project, if we organize block by block and get everybody on the block to sign up to own a tree, then we will be successful. And as soon as we all heard, you know, block by block organizing, we were on board. And it's true, because prior to that, Oakland had had 7 tree planting initiatives that the Department of Parks had done. They planted the trees, and within minutes, kids with switchblades came in and cut the trees down. So they had failure after failure. Our project, where we organized block parties after we got everybody signed up, and we had barbecues and out on the street, and we had bands playing, and we had families dancing, and we had the representatives from business, from the logging industry, from government, from community activists, all of whom at that point hated each other. Remember, environmentalists were chaining themselves to trees, you know.
Yes,
and while that might feel cathartic,
yes, right.
And while that might feel cathartic, it wasn't going to change the practices. And as a result of our little pilot project in Oakland, which we then expanded throughout the state of California, which then grew into a larger renewable resource initiative, which ended up with legislation, which we, by the way, worked with Wangari Maathai, who was forming the global green belt movement at exactly the same time in Kenya. It became the model for renewable resources and urban reforestation, and the trees are still standing there. Every time I visit, it's like these tiny little oak trees that we planted are like giant forests as parks, and the streets are lined, and it's beautiful.
Oh, how rewarding, and what a metaphor.
Yes.
For the work you've been doing.
Yeah, yeah, yes. I never thought of that.
Yes, it is. That is the perfect metaphor for it. So as you look toward the future, what do you see? I mean, we're in a time of both great progress,
yes,
and great strife,
yes,
and great pushback.
Yes.
And I remember when I was writing my book, The War on Choice, and I interviewed Hillary Clinton, and she said, you know, we need to remember about women's rights.
Yes.
That we've only made this much progress in the last 50 years, and there is going to be massive pushback.
Yes.
And boy, are we ever seeing it right now.
Yes.
And
Yes.
yet, we are at a stage where women are half of the athletes at
Yes.
the Olympics.
Yes.
And we have a female on the ticket for the presidency this year. So how do you size that up? I mean, what do you see for in the future? What do you think is going to
So I have a
happen?
couple of different answers to that. Number one, I just want to say that I am deeply inspired by young activists. I always have been. I've always had a soft spot for young activists, and I have mentored many, and it's always been a two-way mentoring because they've taught me as much as I've taught them.
Yes.
Yes. There are brilliant young organizers who are working at the interstices of gender and climate and race and so many issues, and they're doing it in such wonderfully creative ways, and they know how to amplify their voices through social media tools that we didn't have. That March on Washington we talked about, I mean, imagine getting that many people when we were using index cards and shoe boxes and mimeograph machines and carbon paper on manual typewriters. I mean, imagine what can happen now. And so young organizers, you know that one of the many organizations that I'm very active in, I've been an advisor for 40 of its 50 years, is called Global Citizen Circle. And in 2017, we did a circle with Lauren Hogg, right after the horrible Marjorie Stoneman shooting. And she was one of the co-founders. Her brother and friends were co-founders of the March for Our Lives movement. And she said something wonderful. She looked out at the audience, which was very intergenerational. She said, you old folks are always complaining about us being on our phones, but let me tell you something about our phones. The night of the shooting, I was on the floor of my bedroom with 8 of my friends. We were all lying on top with our phones, and we got 100,000 people to show up the next day. She said, so like, we're not just, you know, posting pictures of kitty cats. You know, we are really doing work. And it was a wonderful moment. So young people really, really inspire me and give me hope.
And what do you plan on doing
Okay, so
in the future?
I have come to realize that, like Dr. King said, I may not get to the promised land, but you will. Like Moses didn't get to the promised land, but that I will not see in my lifetime the fruition of all the causes I care about. However, as long as I have breath in this body, I have a sacred obligation to keep carrying the torch forward as long as I can, knowing that my generation is carrying it, and that there are several generations that follow me that are carrying it, and now there are teenagers who are carrying it, and that we're all doing it together. I call it the long relay race for human rights and social justice. And I just feel like it's what I need to do, and anybody, whether they've been involved before or not, needs to be doing now.
That's so beautiful. That is so beautiful. And I hope that you are writing about that philosophy. I know that you're working on a book that you've been working on for a while.
Yes.
And so I know everybody wants to know about that. So tell us about it.
So the book I'm writing, its holding title is The Power of Connectedness. It has a foreword by Desmond Tutu, who passed away 2 years ago, so that gives you an idea how long I've been working on it. But I have permission from his family to use it posthumously. And it's all about kind of what we've been discussing, the importance of relating, connecting, the importance of relationships on a personal level, on a professional level, on a global level, the challenges to them on a personal level, on a familial level, on a global, international, every level. There are reasons why, some external and some internal, of why we have trouble connecting initially or staying connected to others. And so I'm trying to share my stories from my life of as honestly and authentically, so that I don't come across as like I'm the guru on connectedness. Like, yes, I know a lot about it, but I've made all the mistakes that everybody's made. And so I want to write very honestly about where I failed and why I think I failed. And I want to write about what was particularly painful for me, some familial situations that were very difficult for me to overcome, to be able to recreate a relationship that had been ruptured. And I'm looking forward to it being published someday when I finish writing the manuscript.
You know, books tend to sort of write themselves
Exactly.
eventually. And you never finish, by the way.
Exactly, no.
But don't expect to finish.
No.
You just have to decide, I'm stopping now.
I'm stopping now, and there'll be another book.
That's right, yes, that's right, that's right. And so in that vein, I'm sure that those young activists out there would love to know what your advice to them would be. What would you tell a young activist today?
Don't stop. Claim your power. You do not have to, and often I say this in women's groups because women are less prone to know how to claim their power.
Tell me, I spend my life helping
this is
women do that.
We're acculturated to take care of everybody else, but like minimize ourselves. But there's a difference between being braggadocio, oh, I'm this, I'm that, and just honestly like knowing this is my worth, this is what I can do, this is who I am, and I am going to show up and present with my wholeness, with my power, with my autonomy, with my authority, and I am going to let you see it and experience it, and you may not be able to accept it. That's not my problem, that's your problem. And so if anybody tries to diminish you and demean you, do not appropriate their perception. It's their perception. Do not allow it, because that's our biggest, even me.
Right.
Like when someone diminishes, demeans, it's very easy to like kind of fall back into that crushed position. But no, hold yourself proud and say, I'm sorry that you can't see who I am. I'm awesome. And you can say that without being like egoistic. It's just true. I mean, you're awesome. I'm awesome. Everybody who does anything is awesome. And it hold on to it. Don't let anybody rob you of your power.
That's a wonderful way to start to bring a close to this conversation. I can't I can't think of anything I would love more than for that message to
Yes,
be heard
yes.
by everyone. It's so incredibly important. And I wonder, as you look back at all of the things that you have done and all of the things you intend to do in the future,
Right.
are there any particular personal reflections that you have that you'd like to share?
Yeah, there's definitely one. You absolutely have to find a way to nurture and nourish yourself, because you have to replenish, because this type of work is exhausting and it takes a toll. And if you don't renew yourself, you burn out. And I learned this decades ago. When I was about 40, I was starting to see a lot of people who had been involved for 20 or more years really become discouraged at the least and bitter at the worst. Like, ugh. And I thought, I don't want to be like that. I just don't want to be like that. And there's a reason why airline attendants say, put your own oxygen mask on first before you try to help anyone else. So for everybody, it's going to be something different. For somebody, it's going to be running. For somebody else, it's going to be getting a massage. For somebody else, it's going to be binging a Netflix series. It doesn't matter what your thing is, but find the thing that nourishes you, that gives you energy, that brings your level back up, so that you can stay optimistic and enthusiastic well into your 70s and beyond. My husband's 89 in his 90th year, and he's still active. And his mantra is, keep hope alive.
Keep moving. Keep moving. You must
Keep moving.
You must keep moving. So on a very personal level, as somebody, and this is going to be, I think, the last question. I keep thinking it's the last question, but then I have another question. But this really is the last question, because I think it's an extremely important one. As we actually do make progress,
Yes.
for example, as we do see more women in leadership positions and holding positions of power, how do you see our responsibility to, and I think this is particularly an important question for
Yes.
Women's Forum members
Absolutely.
who do hold
Yeah.
power and do hold
Yes.
positions where we can
Absolutely.
be influential in other ways. How do we know when we've won enough that we need to stop fighting for something and start claiming it?
There is no such day.
And how do we,
It's an ongoing.
but how do we maintain
Yeah.
the value of being the insurgent?
Absolutely.
Is that you're trying to dismantle a negative kind of power and
Right.
replace it with a positive kind
Exactly.
of power.
Exactly.
When we are there and have the opportunity for that positive kind of power,
What kinds of things?
what do we do? What do we do?
Okay, so a couple of things. So
Yes.
like you, I'm a very proud member of the Women's Forum of New York since 1986. I've served on its board. I'm delighted to be doing this series. There are a few things. Women need to always be helping other women. Anybody who's marginalized
Yes.
has to help other marginalized people. Like, getting in the door does not mean you've finished the process. It's the beginning of the process. You have to keep the door wide open and like welcome people in and help them enter and help them go through whatever process you went through to be able to go through it. And that's another wonderful thing about the forum, is the whole mentoring program and the whole educational scholarship program and all the ways in which the forum helps younger women and even women who are in midlife but didn't have an opportunity to get an education because of family or socioeconomic status to advance in their life. And so really we have to keep opening the door. The other thing is, and this is a bit more controversial, there is endless amount of research that show that boards that have more women on them make more effective decisions and make more money.
More money.
Like if you're not going to respond to the moral issue, respond to the financial issue, you're going to make more money. They've also shown, other studies have shown that countries that have more women in their legislatures make better decisions for, like, not just the social issues, the issues that are usually considered women's issues like childcare, et cetera, but for financial advancement. So while the concept of quotas is controversial, I'm a really strong believer in encouraging companies and governments to actively seek more women. Now, the immediate answer to this, oh, well, you're just letting them in because they're a woman or they're a person of color. No, they are qualified. They are qualified people who happen to be women or people of color. They are totally qualified. They're more qualified probably than a lot of the people you already have on your board. They've just never been part of your network. Again, we talked about the old boys network. You don't know them, but just ask us. We do know them. We can, and there's a lot of organizations that have pipelines for getting women on boards, getting women elected. And so I'd say support those organizations. And if you happen to be blessed to be on a board yourself or in a legislature yourself, work to get other women and other people of color, other marginalized, LGBTQ, whatever. We are all only temporarily abled, so disabilities, people with disabilities, anything that's not mainstream, anything that's been marginalized, work to bring them on board.
We can't do better than that as an ending. Thank you so much, Nadine, for sharing your wisdom, your story, and just giving us this incredible inspiration to keep working to make this world a better place.
Absolutely.
You're amazing.
Thank you. So are you, my darling.